How in the hell did we get here? With John Zink is brought to you by IT Avalon. Visit our sponsor at itavalon.com. Now, here's John Zink.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to the How in the Hell Did We Get Here podcast. I'm your host, John Zink. And today I'm joined by Dr. Jeff Hoffman. His name's Jeffrey. He goes by Jeff. And as you can see in the background there, he works for Nationwide Children's Hospital. And he is the CMIO, which is Chief Medical Information Officer, also Professor of Pediatrics, Division Chief of Clinical Informatics, and lives in Dublin, Ohio. So thanks so much for joining me today, Jeff. And how's the weather out there in Columbus, right? You're in Columbus?
Yeah, I work, the hospital's in Columbus, Ohio. I live up in a northwest suburb, as you mentioned. Weather here for early February, it is really nice. It is probably partly sunny, maybe, at least it was earlier, and low 50s. I can't ask for better.
That's awesome. I got some family members that live in a little town called Forest, Ohio, which is maybe, I don't know, 600 or 700 people. I just remember when I visited them earlier in my life, there was a lot of Amish in that area. I just remember cart and buggy cruising around. Is that all over Ohio or Pennsylvania area, or where's that at?
So you traditionally think of them from central Pennsylvania, the traditional Pennsylvania Dutch, but Amish, they spread into Ohio. We have a large Amish community in the state. We see them, Amish families from time to time at the hospital. I see them in the hallways and such. So
yeah, it was always
cool. To serve them as well.
So born in Baltimore, Maryland, grew up in Southeast Florida.
Yes.
So I was born and raised in a really small town in Northwest Illinois, and it seems like the first part of my life I didn't really travel outside of like an hour circumference of my little town. So what was it like growing up in Southeast Florida near Miami, right?
Yeah, in a town called Hollywood, right between Miami and Fort Lauderdale on the Atlantic coast. Florida was a lot quieter back then, late 60s, early 70s into the 80s, before all the money came in, before the Miami Vice era, for those of you who remember those days. Miami was a fairly small town, vacation town. I think tallest building was maybe 20 stories, if. Hollywood was just one of the sort of bedroom communities north of Miami that my parents moved to when my father was transferred for his job. It was nice. Our schools it was great. T-shirt, shorts, and flip-flops at school every day. Outdoor lockers. I think I owned one pair of long pants in case we had to go somewhere fancy. Beach was 15 minutes away. I think I spent every other weekend on the beach, getting probably more sun than I should, from what my dermatologist says today. It was a quiet lifestyle, very, very low, sort of a slow pace, only busy during the winter times when the snowbirds would come down. So sort of stay away from the touristy areas during them, but otherwise it was a great place to grow up.
So you mentioned your parents. What did your parents do for a living?
My mother was a teacher. Although ironically, after she started to have children, she had to sort of step away from teaching, because back then you couldn't teach if you looked like you were pregnant, because of course you couldn't have kids asking questions.
Interesting.
It was strange. She graduated as a teacher. Within 3 months, she was pregnant with my older brother, and then obviously to step away from teaching for months at a time, and eventually just never went back. My father was in advertising. So I grew up with all of that sort of context that actually informs my work today. Every single day, my the sort of the English correction pen and the idea of what marketers and advertising executives do kind of color my world. Like I said, even today in my day-to-day work.
Well, it all kind of bleeds into each other. Sales, marketing. I mean, it's just like it.
Communication.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what?
How do you message people? How do you get a message across? How do you make your points effectively and efficiently? Um, yeah, it's all very, very useful stuff.
So you've got a wife of 25 years. What's her name?
Rhonda,
Rhonda. And then
yes.
3 kids, 24, 20, and 17. You guys are almost empty nesters.
Almost, which is interesting. My wife doesn't much like that. She would like to have children around at all times. So there's that. But yeah, it's. I remember when our youngest was born that evening in the hospital. I don't know why this sort of popped into my head, but I remember turning to Rhonda and I said, "I just realized we're gonna have a teenager in our house for 15 straight years." So we are just just a year and a half shy of, or actually now six months shy of finishing that stretch, that run.
Wow. I'm 51. I'll be 52 in May. And my wife and I, we have one child and he's 5 years old. So, it's our miracle baby that we tried forever in our 30s.
Congratulations.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, it's like we tried forever in our 30s with some medical help. Didn't happen. So we're like, well, we'll just run our business. We'll travel. We'll do that kind of stuff. And then God stepped in and said, boom, when I was 46 years old, that no, you're going to have a kid. You're going to have a son. And it's the biggest miracle of life. So it's pretty cool that we got to experience. But he'll be graduating high school. I'll be like 64. So, mad respect for children's hospitals and the work that you guys all do. It must be, I was thinking about it when I was putting this whole thing together. It must be times of unbelievable inspiration and then times of unbelievable heartbreak with what you guys have to go through. Tell me about how you deal with both the heartbreak and then the great excitement that you get from having a kid walk out of there happy and healthy. And I mean, the families too. I mean, it's got to be a huge thing for you guys to deal with both sides of the coin on that too.
Absolutely. The breadth and the scale of the kinds of things that we deal with every day here is just mind-boggling at times. If you stop and think about it, the effect that we have, not just on individual patients and families, but just broadly the population of patients that we serve. It's just the amount of impact that you can have, and the fact that it's in pediatrics means that the impact you have is going to last a lifetime for these children. It's not just something that you're dealing with episodically, or in many cases in medicine, you're dealing with people later in life who have a lot of health conditions. These are people that truly, it's saving a life has quite a different context when you're talking about a 2-year-old. My clinical I trained in pediatric emergency medicine, so I spent 20 years in the emergency department, and just dealing with everything from the most minor issue that was just worrying a parent at night, bringing their child in because they had a fever, and they didn't know what was wrong, or a rash they couldn't get rid of, or something like that, all the way up to the most serious, most catastrophic, most just unbelievable trauma that a family can experience. It's quite the gamut, and to have someone, walk out that door or make it up to their, up to the ICU and eventually out of the hospital is just it's just incredibly gratifying. And over the years, I know that, the number of lives that I've personally touched in that regard is, innumerable, and something that I'm just honored that I get to help people in that way, that they let me into their lives to help them at the times where they're most in need and most desperate for help.
Yeah, and most vulnerable. I mean, it's like with me with a 5-year-old, it's just like little things like a fever, and all of a sudden you see the eyes roll to the back of the head, because it's so it affects
scary.
him so hard compared to how it affects an adult. And I'm just like, wow, it's so scary. And, just last night, sleeping in bed with him because he was sick, and, he pukes 3 times, and it's just like all of a sudden he wakes up this morning, jumps up. He's like, I feel great. I'm like, well, I had 4 hours of sleep, so good for you.
Mm-hmm. And I think one of the hardest things in pediatrics is, because the amount of care and the amount of just parental, I don't even know how to describe it. Just the amount they invest in their children, and the fact that they don't know necessarily what's going on. They obviously don't have the knowledge and the training and the expertise we do. So for what us seems like a relatively minor thing, to them is a crisis. And to be able to approach it that way with an understanding of that this is a crisis for you, even though you're the 15th person I've seen today with the same thing, and we're going to be sending you home in 30 minutes. But to approach that with that, amount of compassion, and then basically educating them and helping them understand why they don't need to be worried about this particular thing, not just to help them through this time, but the next time and the time after that. So that's something that in pediatrics we have to take special care to handle differently than, say, my colleagues who deal predominantly with adults.
I think the first couple of times, just when you were talking about that, I was thinking back to the first couple of times where Johnny, our son, had a fever, got sick. We were first kid, right? First kid syndrome. Mm-hmm. Off to the hospital, off to the ER we go. But just like you said, we got educated by the professionals like yourself. And now things like happened last night or happened a couple weeks ago, no big deal because of the, special care that we were given and the education we were given by folks like yourself. The first couple times, man, it's scary as hell.
Absolutely.
This most important little thing that is now in my care. I'm like, I can't screw this up.
Yeah. Yeah.
So for myself, I own an IT staffing company. I can miss work. No big deal. I've got other people working for me and all those kind of things. One of the questions I had for you was, you guys really can't miss work. It's very important that you guys are there. So how do you balance your very important job and then family time? You got a wife, 3 kids, couple pets. How do you balance those two things when you're so busy with what you do?
That's a really interesting and important question. I think at the crux of what is really happening to a lot of my colleagues in medicine, which is sort of the epidemic of physician burnout we're experiencing these days. That work-life balance is very hard to manage when there is that intense amount of responsibility, obligation, sense of responsibility. Like you say, you don't want to miss work. You want to be available for your patients after hours or on weekends, perhaps. You have call to take, which might occur at different frequencies. In the ED, in the emergency department where I worked for all those years, it was shift work. And it was rotating. So it'd be sometimes day shift, sometimes evening shift, night shifts, holidays, weekends. It was a 24/7 operation. And I wouldn't be surprised if I went back over a 4, 5, 6 year stretch and realized that, no birthday, no anniversary, no holiday, no school, school thing was necessarily done on that particular day. That we shifted things all over the place to accommodate my work schedule. And thankfully, my wife and my kids kind of were very accepting and understood that was important. And yeah, that's all my colleagues are experiencing that same experience today.
It's interesting. When I was just out of high school, like I said, I grew up in a very small town in Illinois. I was a paramedic for just a couple of years out of school. And it's like, there's not many people that go into the medical profession that aren't in it for the right reasons. It's there to help us. It's not to get a big house on the hill, and it's to help other people. And everybody that was a volunteer ambulance crew in a very small town, so not one person did anything for money there. It was really just to help out the other people in the town, and it's like really interesting. The reason I got out of it after just a couple of years is because there was a small kid. I think maybe 4 years old, who drowned, and I just couldn't handle it. It was like,
Yeah.
and mostly in a small town, everybody. It's like I talk to people like my wife who went to school at a place where she had 400 people in her class. We had 1,100 people in our town, and every person by name. And just that, like I said, the mad respect I've got for people that are in jobs like yours is just like, mostly in those small towns, every person that you're dealing with, unless somebody gets in a car accident while they're driving through,
Mhm.
it's really something.
Well, and I think it's there's certainly a lot of physicians who are well off and doing well and living, a very, in some cases, extravagant lifestyle and in their at that point in their career. But what I think most people have to realize is that it doesn't start that way. If you look at the amount of effort it takes to get through undergraduate school, to get accepted to medical school, to get through medical school, internship and residency and fellowship training. Um, in fact, for most physicians, myself included, I spent more years in school, effectively training after I graduated high school than before I started school. So 13 years after high school. Um, and it's a long haul, and then in some specialties you're rewarded for that more than others, but you don't go in if you're going into it for the money and the fame. That's there are easier ways to get money and fame than going through that.
Right. So let's go back to early life. Who were some of the people from your early life that really truly inspired you before getting into your career?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think one of the people who I immediately think of when I asked who were kind of my inspirations, and this is going to sound kind of trite being in the sciences, but I had a sixth grade science teacher. I don't remember his name, so I really failed on that note. But he was the first person who truly made school more than just memorizing facts and taking tests. He was about trying to bring up ideas and concepts that were, to me, new, and then having us explore, ask questions, find answers that lead to more questions, and find answers from that. And that's the way he ran the class. And I remember to this day specific conversations and things we did in class and exercises and activities we did. Um, and I, even to this day, I still have that mode of thinking that he instilled in me back then, which is ask questions, ask why, challenge the status quo, and find your own answers, and then let that lead you on to more questions and more answers, and just keep going step by step until you basically understand. And that's been, kind of the way I've approached both my medical career and also now as I've transitioned into health IT.
It's amazing when we're younger, those formidable years, those teachers, mentors, it just means so much because, we're like sponges then, it's just like I watch my kid today and it's just like, I got to watch what I say because it's just like it's coming out of his, yeah, it's coming out of his mouth the next second, but I remember so many people, in my, youth and teenage years that just meant so much to me. Like you're talking about, that just turned me on, literally just turned me on like a light bulb when I got around them, because there was so much that I wanted to learn from those people. And it's amazing to have people like that in your life. Did you dream about being a doctor when you were a kid?
So it's funny. I'd always had an interest in what I would call kind of how the body works. When I first learned to read, actually, when I was 4 years old, I don't know, no one taught me. I guess I just I don't know how I picked it up, but yeah, I started kindergarten reading. In fact, I went with the first graders to library because they didn't take the kindergartners to library because no one knew how to read. So, but I went with the first grade class. But my first time, my father loved to read. He loved libraries, and we would go to the library probably at least a couple times a month. And I remember when I got my first library card, 4 years old. I checked out the first books I checked out was one on how the ear worked and one on how the eye worked, because I just thought they were cool. And I think I checked them out like over and over again, probably for a good few months because I just wanted, because he had to bring them back after a period of time, and I just kept checking him out. And and so I'd always had this interest in the body and fascination with it, how it worked, and that kind of thing. But I never, truly thought about what it'd be like to be a doctor. I mean, there was no doctors in my family. My only experience with a doctor was my own pediatrician, who I only saw intermittently. I wasn't a very, sick kid. Um, but it wasn't until I was a teenager and I got appendicitis and had to be in the hospital for a week and had surgery, where I saw kind of medicine from the inside in a way I hadn't before. And that's when it kind of said, I kind of thought, this is a really interesting. I mean, after I got over the pain of surgery, this is a real interesting place. Lots of stuff going on here that I'm curious about, and that kind of led to me thinking, I think I'd want to do something like this.
I remember thinking that same thing, just how interesting both ambulatory and hospitals were. It's just like, I just was thinking when you're like going back to when I was in paramedic classes, sitting there starting IVs on each other. It's just like, I remember the first time somebody else trying to start an IV in my hand. I'm like, holy cow, this hurts. But so interesting to sit there and do that on another person. And it's like when I go and either give blood today, or I actually give myself, I'm on testosterone, so I give myself shots, and my wife's like, how do you do that? I'm like, this is nothing. Sit there and have somebody who has no idea what they're doing start an IV in your hand. That's pain.
That takes some bravery, my friend.
Well, we
trust in the other person.
Well, yeah. The interesting part was to be an EMT and a paramedic, and having nurses call you in to start an IV on somebody because you had to do it in the back of a moving ambulance. It's like in a hospital, we were the ones they called to come in and do it when they couldn't get it going on somebody. It was really interesting education for me at an early age, and I loved it. So tell us about your path to today. Where did you start your career out in medicine?
Right. So I actually went to medical school already knowing I wanted to be in pediatrics.
And how did you know that?
So it's interesting. I originally thought when I was when I was in pre-med, I thought, I thought surgeon, because that's kind of the sexy thing everyone thinks about. You're going to be a surgeon. And I had this moment where I kind of realized that all throughout my life up to that point, I had really gravitated towards working with children. I was a camp counselor. My first job was at a toy store. I mean, sounds kind of strange, but I had always sort of been interested in working with children, and when I thought more about that, I realized that there was a lot of joy in that for me. And so I decided I wanted to do pediatrics. I mean, it didn't hurt that the only doctor I'd ever really dealt with, other than the surgeon who did my appendicitis, was a pediatrician. But so I decided to go to do pediatrics. And then, but I was very interested in a lot of the kind of critical care side of things, like where it was, the intensive care unit and the ED, the emergency department, and other places that kind of, as I went through my residency in pediatrics, I realized that I wanted to do emergency medicine. And so I did a fellowship in emergency medicine in Kansas City. Great place, Children's Mercy Hospital there. And from there, I figured I would just be a frontline emergency room physician for however long that career lasted. And I, did a couple years in Dayton, and then I did a few years down in Florida, and then eventually came back up here. Along the way, I had always had this interest in technology, as many kids in the late 70s did. It was the dawn of the personal computer back then. My first experience and my only actual formal education in it was taking an introduction to programming class in 10th grade in high school on some old Apple IIs. And but I had kept up with sort of being involved in using technology, using computers as they came along. And then in medical school, one of the experiences that I had, it was an elective in your last year in medical school, was to basically work in the microbiology department with second year medical students doing their microbiology rotation, where you learn about all the little bugs that can infect us and how those are handled and how to figure out what's what. And as part of that, there was this simulation they did at the end of the class where the students would come in and they would have in front of them pieces of paper that had basically a fake patient's history on it that they would review and sort of try to figure out who or what kinds of infections they might have, order, so to speak, specimens that would be delivered to their bench to process in their microbiology lab the next day, and then decide what kind of treatment to put them on, what kind of antibiotic to pick, and that kind of thing. And they would write all that down on a card. And then we, as fourth year medical students doing this elective, we were the ones who wrote those stories. We took those cards every day. And then after class was over, we would write down another note that would show up on their desk the next day from the sort of nurse, so to speak, who was taking care of that fake patient, saying how they did overnight on the treatment you prescribed. And were they doing better or doing worse? And we did that a couple of days in a row while they were processing the specimens they were given and figuring out what infection they had, because they had to actually isolate the organism, do tests on it, that kind of thing as part of the lab experience, and adjust their therapy as they went. And every day we'd write a note, oh, this person's doing better. Oh, this person doing badly, went to the ICU last night, and that kind of thing. He had just gotten a whole bunch of computers, and he was very interested in basically computerizing that process because it was very time consuming. And so I had some experience, so I volunteered as my project as part of that rotation or that elective to see if I could write a program that would do all of that. So we'd still have the fourth year students there as advisors and helpers, but they wouldn't have to do all that trudgery every day. And so that was my first experience using computers, both to teach people and also indirectly, because of what had to be written, to document and care for patients. And that experience kind of came up later when I was here in Columbus. And about a year and a half, 2 years in, we had been completely on paper documentation, paper charts in the ED. The decision was made to go to an electronic health record. This was back in 2006. And I remember my boss called me into her office and said, "Hey, we need some people to help out on this project to provide some sort of expertise and help work on, templates and things like that. And I saw all this computer stuff in your background, and would you be interested in doing this?" And I said, "Sure, absolutely. It sounds interesting." And so I was involved in that as we sort of wrote all the templates for the notes we would write and the list of orders we would have in the system and all the information that would be then printed out for families to go home with, those kinds of things. And that experience was so good for me and successful for the organization that an opportunity after that to sort of formally join our IT department to work on our next step, which was to do this for our entire hospital. And so that gradually increased my time away from patient care towards this activity. And that was 2006. By 2012, I was full-time in health IT here as a leader at the hospital and in my current CMIO position, and now have a whole group of physicians that work with me in this space that are specialists in what's called clinical informatics, which is this field of combining health, medical care and technology to its fullest effect. And we're training physicians, just like I trained to be a pediatrician early in those days and an emergency medicine physician. We're now training physicians to do the same job moving forward. So having a training program as well. And it's been an incredible journey with lots of kind of unexpected turns along the way. But I wouldn't have changed any of it.
Well, the intersection of technology and healthcare and now AI, I mean, there has to be some just amazing discoveries and amazing things around the corner as far as some of the things that are happening right now in healthcare and informatics. Can you talk about any of the things that are happening, as we speak here that are really exciting you?
Absolutely. And I think, um, AI is certainly the buzzword these days. Same as say big data was maybe 8, 9 years ago.
Yep.
One led to the other, ironically. Um, but uh, many years ago, it was clear that these systems we have should not just be used to document what you did and tell people what to do and keep track of things. There's more power there. We're collecting all this information. We should be able to use this information to do something more substantial. At first, it took the form of what's called clinical decision support, which is where the computer is serving sort of as a wingman, looking over your shoulder, making sure you're not doing the wrong thing or helping you do the right thing at the right time, prompting you along the way. Very rules based. We wrote in advance what the rules were. If this and this happened, then go ahead and tell them that they should do something different, for example. Um, but several years back, as we got more sophistication and additional resources here that had more training and experience and really leveraging the technology for what it can do, we actually started doing what's called predictive modeling, which is where you take the data you have and try to predict what's going to happen in the future and then use those predictions to take some action. One of the things that we've struggled with for years is, and every place has struggled, is kids get admitted to the hospital and for whatever reason they get sicker while they're in the hospital. And what happens when someone gets sicker is it can either happen in a very controlled way where you know that they're getting sicker, you recognize it, you're trying to deal with it and take care of it. And the other situation where you weren't aware that they were going to get sicker or you didn't recognize the early signs fast enough and they got sicker faster than you expected. And they required, say, to be rapidly transferred to the intensive care unit and have all these therapies done on them. And we know is that patients in that latter bucket where this happens unexpectedly and rapidly have a much higher rate of having serious complications, consequences, and even dying from that happening than if we've been watching them all along and really knowing what was truly happening inside of them. We've had a program here for many years. We call it a watch standard program. It's commonplace around the country now. We didn't start it, but we were one of the early adopters of this, where we try to preemptively identify patients we think are more likely to deteriorate while they're in the hospital so that we can keep a closer eye on them, have plans in place in case things were to happen, and try to prevent those deteriorations from happening then.
And when you see a patient like this, what are some of the symptoms that you're looking for? Are there there's got to be predetermined things that you look for that go, okay, this is one of those people.
There are, you're looking for subtle things. Maybe their heart rates are trending upwards to some extent, or their oxygen levels are trending downwards, or their lab results are going one way or the other, or they're having a little more trouble breathing than before, or maybe they're not urinating as much as they were before. Little things that you have to put together. And effectively what you're doing as a clinician is matching that pattern of events, that pattern of findings against what you've learned and have seen is likely to be causing that and what could happen as a result of it. And so that's that awareness that you bring, that instinct. And we talk about these medical intuitions and medical instincts, and really it's sort of matching against a pattern that you've seen before, you've been taught about. And there's varying degrees to which you're successful in doing that. Sometimes you miss it. It's there, but you didn't see it. Sometimes it's too subtle to notice. Sometimes it's something you've not seen before yourself. Maybe others have, but you haven't. So we know is that in our case, about half the children who wind up having that unexpected deterioration, rapid acceleration of care, who are at greatest risk for something bad happening as a result of them, were not in our watcher program. They were not noticed ahead of time that they were likely to have this happen to them. And we've known that for a long time, that we had this sort of blind spot where half the time we knew in advance something might happen and half the time we didn't. And so we took it upon ourselves to figure out, could we use the information we've been collecting on patients for decades here and see if we can have the computer try to predict who would have deteriorated and who wouldn't have, and try to do that early enough ahead of time that we can do something about it. 24 hours ahead of time? Can we tell today who is going to deteriorate tomorrow with a high likelihood? And it turns out we can, which sounds amazing. And we developed this predictive model. We call it the Deterioration Risk Index, or DRI. It basically is a score that when you hit a certain threshold, it prompts the bedside staff, the physicians and nurses taking care of the patient, to basically decide, well, is this patient, need to be watched closer? Do they need to have plans in place? We haven't recognized it before. And yet the computer is saying something's going wrong here, something's off. And it's hard because, children don't want to be sick. One of the things about children is interesting physiologically is that children's bodies compensate much better than adults. You could have a child who is sitting up in bed, playing games, talking, laughing, and the next day they could be seriously ill. It's hard to believe, but it can happen like that. And what's amazing is those subtle things that maybe you had missed, the computer can see. We put that into place about 3 years ago. And we had a dramatic reduction. Overall, about a 25% or so reduction in the number of kids every year who wind up having these unexpected deterioration events occurring that need them to be transferred suddenly to the intensive care unit. And on some of our inpatient units, that reduction is closer to 70 or 80%.
Wow.
Which is amazing, and something that we're in the process now of partnering with a couple other children's hospitals, one regionally, one out on the East Coast, to try to implement something similar there and see if we can get similar benefits that we're seeing here.
So I would figure that it's just because the computer's going off in nothing but data and historical data, and is looking at all of that against what's happening with this child, and where there's no human error or human feelings that can come into it, or outside human interference that's coming into whatever's going on with this kid. This is just looking off nothing but logical data.
And patterns. And seeing patterns that maybe you may not see, or maybe you've had no experience with.
Right.
I myself, there are conditions I've never seen. There are diseases I've never seen, but we could teach the computer to recognize those things. And so that's a form of artificial intelligence. It's called machine learning. It's a similar kind of pattern matching and prediction that's going on with like the chat GPTs today with language. But we've used this technique now to develop quite a number of these predictive models and put them into place to do everything from, improving that kind of situation, detecting early detection of sepsis, which is a severe bacterial infection that can be life-threatening, to seeing who's going to show up for their appointment or not, which asthma patients are likely to show up in your emergency department in the next year after, patients that are very complicated that need a lot of what we call care coordination and outreach. Who's most likely to actually partner with us and help them guide their care, so we can put the resources where they're most needed and where they're most accepted. All kinds of areas that we can use these pattern matchings to look for things that otherwise we thought there's no way we could predict that. And yet somehow in many cases we can.
Amazing. Getting ready for talking with you today, my research, I was looking back, just the history of healthcare. And if we go back 200 years, a short time, medicine has extended life twofold, because 200 years ago, the life expectancy for a man was 35 years and a woman was 36 years. Just amazing in, very short period of time. Now it's 75 plus years of age, is amazing. And I can't wait to see what's going to happen in the future. What are some of the things that you're seeing as far as the future of medicine and the future of, how long people are going to live? what are some of the things? I look at things like some of the things that Elon Musk is doing with like the implantable chips. I'd love to hear what you think about technology like that, both from a physician's standpoint and from a moral standpoint. What your ideas around that kind of stuff are.
Oh, there's so much opportunity and so much promise, and it seems to be accelerating. And just thinking through the question, it can go in a whole bunch of different directions. I think first off, the technology we have today is allowing us to provide much more efficient, much more effective, much safer care. The technologies we have, especially the large amounts of data that we have available, allow us to do things we've never thought possible before. Used to be if you went to your doctor, you'd be relying on their training, their personal experience, and maybe whatever studies or literature they've read recently that maybe looked at 40 or 50 patients that might have a condition similar to yours. Now, and in the near future, you'll be able to turn to your computer in that room and say, okay, pull up all the patients in this hospital that have ever had this condition, or all the patients in the country possibly who've ever had this condition, and show us what treatment works best for the patient who's right in front of me, who's just like them, with their age, their health history, the medications they're on, what's worked, what hasn't worked. And what are those? And so we can make informed decisions together based on what's happened. That's never been possible before. And we are at that point now where that is possible, to really personalize your care based on everyone's experience and not just relying on perhaps what the person you're going to knows themselves or has access to.
Yeah, just like you said before, you might have worked on, depending on the size of the clinic that you work in or the hospital you work in, you might have seen a couple hundred patients, or if you're in a small town, 100 patients, and all of a sudden somebody comes in with, this crazy symptoms that you've never seen before. What the hell do you do? I guess we punt,
So having that subspecialist at your fingertips. The other thing I was thinking of was, certainly the pandemic has escalated this, but telemedicine, being able to access healthcare from anywhere, not being stuck, driving hours to see a doctor and sitting in a waiting room and all that, being able to do that remotely, asynchronously, being able to use these technologies to even improve and speed up how a doctor can get up to speed on you next time they see you. I mean, right now, you come to your doctor, it's been a year, many things may have happened to you in the healthcare space. You may have gone to an ER over here and seen this, urgent care over there and had this medication prescribed or whatever. And you may forget to tell your doctor some things, or maybe they have information in front of them they can look at, but it's an incomplete view. And now your doctor can have a complete view of what's happened to you since you've seen them last, or if you're seeing them for the first time, your entire health history. And what's even better now with AI, it's kind of starting to get in the mix, is that can help basically go through all that material and extract out the important things and summarize information for the doctor, so they're not sitting there with 100 pages of charts from another hospital trying to figure out what happened to you, but just streamline and summarize, and how both efficient that would be for your doctor, but also how much more likely it is that the important things can be taken care of promptly. As far as technology itself, the actual technology, between wearable devices and other things that can track health information, that can help improve recovery from surgery or improve mental health, keeping track of patients better, to, like you say, devices themselves, everything from technology to continuous glucose monitoring and insulin pumps for diabetics, to devices now that basically track and monitor seizure activity in patients who have epilepsy, to ultimately devices that hopefully will help people who were paralyzed walk again. I think we're going to be there in the coming years, and technologies that are not so obvious. One of the things that I'm proud of is to work at an organization that has invested and really done a whole lot of great work in what's called genomic medicine. There are lots of diseases that affect children that are based in genetics. You have a bad gene and all of a sudden you have sickle cell disease, or you have a disease called spinal muscular atrophy that you will basically wither away and die by the time you're 8 or 10 years old. And those are single mistakes in a gene that now with medications that are on the market that we help develop here can be cured. Amazing things. And I want to make sure I don't mistake. We didn't do the sickle cell one, but we have one for spinal muscular atrophy, and then there's one for muscular dystrophy that's going through the approval process. I think it may have just been approved. Just amazing. In my time, it's just hard to believe that we've gotten to the point now where we can actually not just treat disease, but really start to cure disease that previously were unattainable. AI is another, just to throw back to AI, I read something recently. Using an AI tool, they were able to basically screen through thousands of potential medications and find something that actually has a potential to treat a particular condition. That would have taken years for human investigators to work through all that. But analyzing the protein structure, analyzing the medications that are available, and trying to match them up, again, pattern matching, the computer said, look at this one. This one looks promising. And those kinds of innovations and future is, I think, what we can all look forward to that will extend life, improve wellness, and help us deal and eventually eliminate a lot of diseases. I firmly believe cancer is in the crosshairs right now. We have all the tools in place right now to finally beat cancer, most kinds of cancer. And I hope in my lifetime, I mean, I'm 57, so I'm not that far ahead of you, but I hope even in my lifetime, we will see a day where most cancers are not just treatable, but curable, and perhaps without the suffering that most patients with cancer have to go through to get there.
I was just a friend of mine works for a company that's what they do. It's nanotechnology that goes in and actually fights, kills, cures, and like gets rid of the cancer, and then actually puts something in the body then to make sure they never get the cancer again. I'm like, what are you talking about?
Amazing.
You know, just unbelievable technology that is right around the corner. And I hope it comes so soon. I got a good friend of mine who is in stage 4 right now, and she's, just fighting for her life right now. And it's like right around the corner is this thing that's just out of reach right now.
It feels like science fiction. It really does.
Well, just to go back to what you said before, when you said about, growing up in school, I remember in typing class, there was 4 computers at the back of the class, and don't touch them, unless you're in that class. And now it's like my kid's sitting there on his iPad, just flipping through, knows exactly what to do, and doesn't know a world without this technology that is so readily available today.
So true. So true. I'll do you one better. That same 6th grade science teacher I mentioned, in his classroom, we had 2 calculators. They were bolted to the table. They were donated. They had been donated by a company because I think they were $1,000 each. And they were bolted to the table, and it was basically a 10-function calculator. It wasn't even a programmable calculator. It was just a simple, one you'd pick up in the store for $1 now. And it was such revolutionary technology at the time to be able to have a computer do math for you right there on your table as a student. It was just incredible. I read something recently, the supercomputer, the Cray one, which is like the first true supercomputer that was available for business back in the 70s, that the iPhone in your pocket now is somewhere on the order of about 100,000 times more powerful than that Cray one supercomputer.
Just
and we carry it around with us.
Unbelievable. Yeah. Sitting right here, doing everything that you'd ever want to do, and like they talk about, being tied to your computer. I don't know anybody's phone number anymore. I don't know how to get anywhere anymore. It's just like, it takes me everywhere I need to be. And, which is both good and bad. but I think it's more good than bad. I mean, just all the amazing things that are added to my life because of this technology is just awesome. And same thing, I was so excited to talk to you today just because when I look into, I own an IT staffing company, so we do a lot with healthcare, and to see the opportunities that are right in front of us and getting to talk to someone like you about it was really exciting for me today. So I really appreciate you joining me.
It's great to have been here.
I've got a couple extra questions here at the end, and then we'll
Sure.
let you get back to your day. So what do you do outside of work for fun?
Up until recently, it was mostly hosting teenage parties on the weekends for my kids, which is you'll get to experience that. It's a lot of work, but very joyous and very loud.
I play in a rock band, so loud stuff.
So the noise won't bother you, and the chaos won't bother you. I love to learn. I can't help it. I'm an educational junkie in that way. So I spend a lot of time just learning new random things. YouTube videos. I used to read, not so much anymore. Podcasts and audiobooks, and that's just very fun for me to learn something new and different, and not just about medicine or technology. It could be about anything, history or politics or whatever.
What's a good segue? Who are some of your favorite either TEDx talks, YouTubers, audiobooks? Who's just some of your favorites? Maybe so you can turn some other people onto.
Yeah, one thing is, if you've not read it, and it's a little bit trite and it's an old book, but you should absolutely read it, is Freakonomics, one of the best books ever written. It really talks about incentives and why people do what they do, and is both enlightening and incredibly useful if you're in any kind of situation where you need other people to do certain things. As far as YouTubers, there's so many great ones out there. I think educationally and certainly in the sciences, I think of like Derek Muller, who's runs the Veritasium channel. Michael Stevens does Vsauce. Stephen Mold has his own channel. In fact, I think he's got some kind of a phenomenon named after him as a YouTuber, because he was the first person to describe it in the physical sciences. It's quite interesting. And then Sabine Hassenfelter is from Germany, and she does mostly science news, but with a very logical and very organized take on things that gives you some perspective on where we're going. And so, yeah, lots of great ones out there.
Awesome. Well, thanks for sharing those. And my last question is the same question I asked to everybody on the podcast. So we know where the hell you've been. We know what the hell you've done. Now, where the hell are you going from here?
Well, my big thing now is I think technology is a double-edged sword. So technology has great promise to make our lives better. But there is a dark side, an ugly side to technology, which is if not done well, it can burden us at the least and make our lives more challenging, more difficult in some ways, if left unchecked. And for example, if you talk to any doctor these days and you ask them what's the biggest burden, they're going to tell you, oh, it's the electronic health record, these computers we have to use. And part of my job is to make sure that burden is as light as possible, that these are tools that they see as helpers, friends, I can't live without, not something I dread using. Some of it is usability, some of it is the requirements placed upon them, but a lot of it is how best to integrate these technologies into the work that we do every day. And then on the other side, outside of medicine, we have a crisis of mental health in children right now, especially teenagers. The amount of anxiety, depression, suicidality is at record highs. Some of that is, even though Mark Zuckerberg will say it's not proven, some of that has to be attributed to social media.
Huge.
Effective technology.
I don't care what Mark Zuckerberg says. It scares the hell out of me with my kid.
He just testified in Congress and said there's no proof, which is technically true. There isn't a whole lot of great studies, but I think it's just obvious.
Yeah, there's no proof that the guy standing over there with a gun might shoot me. Well, they're standing there with a gun, pretty good chance. It scares the hell out of me. It's like I see adults who are so affected by what's said or done on social media. How the hell do you think kids? I remember back to how I was as a kid without that stuff around. If somebody said the wrong thing to me as a child or a teenager, it could affect my week or my year. I can't imagine having access to thousands of people on the internet and how that can affect me or affect those kids.
And it's 24/7. 24/7. The bar to be a bully is way lower. You don't have to see someone face to face. You can, cyberbullying is a real thing. And then last I'll mention is AI, just because I recently read some other stuff on this. As we've been trying to use more and more, especially this generative AI, the ChatGPTs and the AIs that produce images and such, that there's a huge risk in the coming years that we'll have a much harder time as ourselves and as a society separating truth from fiction. That AIs have the promise to transform our existence. They also have the potential of making it very hard to tell what's true anymore. Everyone worries about AI from a Terminator perspective. Oh, they're going to turn and exterminate humanity because, that's what it shows in the movies. I think that that loss of faith in what's true is probably more damaging and insidious and likely to happen if we're not careful. And so it's something that I think in the healthcare space we focus on because we don't want the computer saying something that's not true and it affects someone making a treatment decision. But there's a broader sense to that, whether it's accidental in the case of just hallucinations these AIs do, or intentional, people using these tools to their own ends, whether that's political, whether that's criminal, whether that's just philosophical.
Well, politicians are already doing it. they're lying all day long, so I can only imagine what AI is going to add to that in the future, because today they just get to say whatever the hell they want to with a little to no.
Well, the deep fake has entered our terminology. I don't know, and this is way aside. You don't have to include this if you want, but interesting. I just read, so China. I don't know when it happened. But I heard about it just last couple of days ago. There was an incident in China where somebody did a deep fake video conference call. So basically, dialed up somebody at a company who had access to their basically accounts, and tricked them into thinking they were having a video call with leadership at their organization, instructing them to transfer money from one account over to other accounts, and wound up stealing about $28 million from this company. And the person said, I thought I was talking to them. They were right there in the video. And it turns out it wasn't them.
Yeah, that's what we have to look forward to.
Yeah. So crazy times, but it's been great talking to you. I always enjoy the trip down memory lane for myself, and also talking about what I do and the future that awaits us all.
Well, it's been awesome. And everybody who tuned in today to the podcast, we thank you so much for tuning in. And Jeff, I'd like to say thank you so much for joining us. It's been a great conversation. Everybody else, thanks for tuning in, and we will talk to you next time on the How the Hell Did We Get Here podcast. I'm John Zink. Thanks.
The How in the Hell Did We Get Here podcast is brought to you by IT Avalon. For more information and links to other episodes, please visit johnzinkpodcast.com. We'll see you next time on How in the Hell Did We Get Here?
The future's right now.